Limbus Company has just given us a second bleed identity for Outis, and the general consensus of the community is that she's really strong. You've probably seen people call her a powerhouse already, and I'm sure more videos will be made on her strengths in the future. But in today's video I want to take a look at this identity and figure out if she's worth the hype or if people are overstating her abilities. Because in my humble opinion, I will not be using Barber Outis over Ring Outis in my bleed team. Want to figure out why? Well, then you'll have to watch until the end. But before we start, I have to tell you that over 100% of my viewers are subscribed. As you can see on the graph, 101% of people that watch my videos are subscribed. So if you aren't, you're just weird. I mean, everyone is subscribed, why aren't you? Really, the best you can do right now is scroll down and press the subscribe button to fit in with the crowd. And now, back to Outis. Before I start berating our newest Outis identity, let me quickly explain how she works and what niche she fills in the bleed team. We'll start off with the 3 new effects Outis brings to bleed. First, we have the new mechanic shared by all the Blood-themed enemies and identities – Blood Fist. Blood Fist stacks up to 999, and it's not an effect applied to enemies or allies, but instead it's a new general effect that stores all bleed damage done in a fight. This means that both taking and dealing bleed damage will increase Blood Fist, so the effect stacks the best against other Blood-themed enemies. An interesting part of Blood Fist we haven't gotten to use yet is the fact that a lower kindred Blood Fiend cannot consume Blood Fist until a higher kindred Blood Fiend ally does so first. To find out which kindred your identity belongs to, you can look at the ID tags. Outis is a 3rd kindred, for example. Blood Fist is consumed by some of Outis' skills to give her another buff. If there is no Blood Fist to consume, Outis inflicts bleed on herself instead. This allows her to stack a Blood Fist for herself by taking bleed damage on top of inflicting it on enemies. The second effect that Outis introduces is Blood-tinged Scissor Blades, and it's the one that you get by consuming Blood Fist. Its description is quite long, but the effect itself is pretty simple. Blood-tinged Scissor Blades has 3 stages, all of which max out at 10 stacks. The 3 stages all have unique effects that get better as you progress through them. The first stage, simply called Blood-tinged Scissor Blades, has the unique effect of not having an effect. Really, it's just a bit of a buffer before the actual buffs kick in. The second stage is Blood-tinged Scissor Blades 2, and in this stage Outis gets offense level up and defense level down based on the effect stack. This makes Outis better at clashing and dealing damage, but she takes more damage from enemy attacks, making her more fragile. The third and final stage of the effect is, you guessed it, Blood-tinged Scissor Blades 3. This stage discards the weaknesses of stage 2, only providing offense level up based on the stack. If you manage to stack up a bunch of this effect, Outis becomes a lot stronger physically, even without any crazy skills, simply due to the offense level buffs. As I said, this effect is pretty simple, however it's also consumed by the 3rd skill of Outis, but we'll get to that later. The last new effect of this ID is Sewing Target. This effect only stacks to 1, and for 1 turn it forces an enemy to take 0.5% more damage for every bleed potency on them, capping out at 10%. The cap is reached at 20 bleed, which is a very reasonable amount, and if stacked with Gaze, this effect can make the 2 main damage dealers of bleed even stronger, which is why I consider Sewing Target to be the best part of Outis' kit. Now that we're done with her effects, let's rapid fire through her skills and then we'll talk about her niche and problems. First off, Barber Outis has the same 3 scene affinities as Ring Outis, but in a different order. The problem with this order is that Gluttony is now the sin that Outis generates the most of. And, well, bleed doesn't need Gluttony at all. The only notable egos on the team that require Gluttony are Sun Shower and maybe Representation Emitter. The thing with these skills, however, is that they also require other materials which are hard to come by, meaning that only fixing Gluttony isn't even enough to make these 2 egos spammable. On the flip side, making Lust less common in her kit leads to a lower amount of early Whistles procs, which isn't the end of the world as Outis gets Lust on her 2nd skill, so you can still get the back-to-back Whistles by using both of those early, but that can require rerolling, and can actually impair Outis' performance, because of something we'll talk about later. Outis' 1st skill is Sewing. It clashes at 15 power with the condition fulfilled, and consumes up to 40 Blood Fist for up to 5 Scissor Blades. It's not the best way to use Blood Fist as you're converting 8 to 1, but it will have to do. If there's no blood fist to consume, Outis gains 2 bleed count, which is immediately used up by the skill's 2 coins. Speaking of coins, Barber Outis has the exact same level of bleed infliction with her skill 1 as Ring Outis, which is 2 bleed, if used without sewing target. If the effect is on the enemy, sewing inflicts 2 bleed count as well. It's a great first skill at its best on paper, but sadly this is the only source of bleed count on this ID. The Barber's second skill is Scission. This skill converts up to 60 Blood Fist into up to 10 Scissor Blades. If it fails to do so, Outis gains 5 bleed. This skill clashes at 19 power with this condition fulfilled, and the coins of the skill inflict 2 bleed and 1 sewing target. If the enemy is already inflicted with sewing target, the coins inflict a much higher total of 6 bleed. The third skill of Outis is the one that people love the most. I'll Make You a New Dress is a rare skill with 4 coins. It reaches 21 power in a clash with both conditionals active, and does not consume Blood Fist like the other skills do. Instead, this skill relies on Scissor Blades for its effects. Outis' skill 3 gains 1 attack weight at 10 blades, and 1 more at 20. The blades used for the attack weight are consumed after the attack. If this skill kills an enemy, Blood Fist is increased by 20, and Outis gets half of her used Scissor Blades back. If the enemy had sewing target, Outis increases Blood Fist by another 20, and gains 5 more Scissor Blades. The first 3 coins of the skill inflict 2 bleed each, amounting to a total of 6 bleed. The last coin, however, is the one that actually matters. Outis gets 3% more damage for every Scissor Blade if she is at 10 or more, and at 20 or more she gets 4% for each up to a cap of 120%. All of this makes the third skill of Outis an actually formidable damage skill. In the best case scenario, this skill can hit 3 enemies, all of which have sewing target and 20 bleed, while Outis has 200 Blood Fist consumed and the maximum amount of Scissor Blades on herself, dealing over 400 damage to targets with neutral resistances. Obviously, this damage can be further increased against staggered or wrath-weak enemies to reach over 800 damage in one hit. Such a high amount of damage surely puts the new Outis over any other bleed identity, doesn't it? Then why did I start this video by saying that she's overhyped? Well, it's finally time to talk about Outis' shortcomings. The largest glaring weakness of her kit is the obvious lack of bleed count infliction. Bleed is an effect that desperately requires a lot of count to work well. One of the frontrunners in terms of bleed infliction for the team has always been Ring Outis, who can put up 10 count in 2 turns by using her second skill twice. Barber Outis, on the other hand, can inflict a maximum of 4 count in 4 turns. Yeah, it's that bad. And even worse, if you opt to get that 4 and 4, you're losing out on the potency infliction potential of her second skill, because of sewing target, which brings me to her second weakness, sewing target. The effect itself is not at fault here. As I've said, it's one of Outis' strong parts, but the way her skills are designed around sewing target is what makes her weaker. Sewing target is only inflicted with the last coin of Outis' skill 2. This means that during the 6 skill rotation, only one of the 2 second skills can gain the sewing target buff. This actively limits her ability to inflict bleed potency, unless you decide against holding her skill 3 for more setup, in which case you need to give up another part of her kit. In a similar way, if you opt to use sewing target on her skill 1, you're limiting your potency infliction even more, and in my opinion, if you're using sewing target on her skill 1 in general, you're better off using Ring Outis anyways, since you can just get more count in less time with less setup. Another problem of Scission is that it's the Barber's only lost skill. As I've said earlier, skill 2's affinity can be used to proc whistles in the early turns, and that's usually part of Bleed's win condition. You get more SP early, and then Ringy Sun and Reparoshu go ham with their powerful skills, as the rest of the team helps them keep up the bleed stack. Ring Outis synergizes with such a playstyle really well, as she can use her weaker skill 1 and block to get the early SP going, and then use her powerful second skill to inflict a bunch of count without having to fear that it's going to waste early. The same cannot be said about the Barber, as her bleed potency infliction during the first 2 turns has a fairly high chance of going to waste, and a lot of your identities will not be able to support it with count if you're going for whistles. Hu Honglu will not have haste up on turn 1, so his count infliction is entirely luck dependent. Faust can often go for her evade if she does not have her skill 2 available, which further limits the bleed count infliction of the early turns. Yi Sang can also go for a block if you either didn't get his second skill or are reluctant to use it early with no rerolls. Roshu inflicts no count with Skullbuster and can also go for her counter. These skills accumulate into a high chance for double Session's 8 bleed to be used up during the early turns, making Outis' addition to the bleed stack pretty negligible. Of course, these things can be mitigated by rerolling. A 7-speed Hook Honglu and 2 uses of the gripping can set up an early double reroll Sanguine Pointillism, which further helps the bleed from Outis to live to see turn 3. I am a firm hater of rerolling, but do with this info what you will. Because we're moving on to Outis' biggest problem, her skill 3. You remember me saying this skill deals insane damage, and you've likely seen videos of her doing huge damage as well. But that high number is deceiving. The Barber's third skill's claim to fame is its attack weight. However, fundamentally, this ability is flawed. Bleed as an effect is best used against bosses which really don't care about your attack weight. When fighting bosses with just one part, Outis' strongest skill gets a 66% damage cut at its strongest, heavily lowering her potential damage output. There is another variable that holds Outis back in terms of damage, and that variable is her damage type. Barber Outis is a mono/slash identity. One major source of additional damage in Bleed is Anchor Faust's unique Gaze effect, which acts as pretty much 2 stacks of blunt and pierce fragility. A mono/slash identity like Outis gains nothing from this effect, while Ring Outis actively makes use of it to deal commendable damage with her skill too. Her deviation from normalcy in terms of damage typing also has another problem in the fact that she cannot be used for Pierce Rushdown. Bleed teams notoriously house the strongest Pierce identities in all of Limbus Company, meaning that whenever you want to take down a Pierce weak enemy, Bleed is your best bet. Putting Barber Outis in Bleed when you're doing Pierce Rushdown is, for obvious reasons, a horrible idea, and unlike someone like Rap Roshu, she does not have enough brute force to make a place for herself on the team regardless of the damage typing. To sum my rant up, Barber Outis has a worse sin affinity spread than Ring Outis, inflicts almost no bleed count and doesn't inflict enough bleed potency either. She has a much weaker skill 2 than Ring Outis and has a skill 3 that gets its power from attack weight on a team which is designed to fight bosses. Barber Outis tries to fill the niche of a bleed damage dealer, which is a niche that's firmly taken by Rap Roshu, and in order to put her on the team in the first place, you need to give up one of the best bleed supports in the game, which just ruins your bleed stack. But I want to end this video on a better note. If there is one thing Barber Outis is good at, it's clearing mirror dungeons. As much as I don't like bringing up this mess of a game mode into any identity power debates, I have to say that when bleed is being accounted for by bleed gifts, and effects like Gaze seem insignificant when compared to damage gifts, and you cannot simply choose to only fight Pierce weak enemies with this team, Barber Outis becomes miles better than Ring. Her attack weight actually impacts a lot of the fights throughout the dungeon, and her certain target debuff gets topped off almost immediately and allows all allies to deal even more damage. Outis still doesn't reach the level of power of Ring Outis and Red Eyes Roshu, but between the 3 of them, Bleed gets a damage dealer for every damage type in the game, which speeds up the process of clearing mirror dungeons by a lot. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and if you want to hear me call Fen Hang Hong Lu different kinds of insults for 10 minutes straight, leave a like and comment to let me know. If you disagree with me, I would love to see your point of view, so make sure to leave a comment in that case as well. This was Ultranum and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!